Warning: this episode contains brain food that will lead to improved emotional and social intelligence. Give us 1 hour and we'll help you change the way you think about happiness. Harvesting Happiness with Lisa Cypers Kamen is fresh, optimistic, and purpose-driven media that promotes well-being from the inside out. Each week, Lisa spotlights diverse trendsetters and change agents who are the greatest contemporary thinkers and doers, devoting their lives to creating a better world in which to live. Your host, Lisa Cypers Kamen, is a widely recognized applied positive psychology expert, author, documentary filmmaker, and lecturer specializing in optimal lifestyle management. Let's get to it. Here's Lisa.
This episode was recorded while on the road, and you know what that means. Imperfect sound, imperfect technology, but still that perfect, health-consciously prepared brain food. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening wherever you are. Thanks for joining us on today's show, where you will learn a better life practice, answering tough challenges through conscious solutions. My first guest is Leonard Perlmutter, also known as Ram Lev. Leonard is the founder of the American Meditation Institute in Averill Park, New York. Over the past 4 decades, Leonard has served on the faculties of the New England Institute of Ayurvedic Medicine and the International Himalayan Yoga Teachers Association. He is a direct disciple of Swami Rama of the Himalayas. He is the author of several books, but the one we're talking about today is his newest, Your Conscience, the key to unlock limitless wisdom and creativity and solve all of life's challenges. Leonard, to solve all of life's challenges, give us the secrets. Let's go.
Well, first, thank you for the invitation. I really appreciate being back with you.
Oh, me too. I've enjoyed our conversations over the years, but this is saying a lot, to solve all of life's challenges. I'm in. Talk to us.
Okay, well, I was in quarantine starting in February of 2020, and I didn't have classes here at the American Meditation Institute as I usually do. And I began questioning myself, how am I to be of service? And I, like everybody, watching the news, reading the papers, aware of the pain and the trauma that so many millions of people actually worldwide have been going through because of this strange COVID situation, I decided that I had to give them something that would help them deal with all this pain and all this uncertainty. And so from my personal experience, the conscience has been my guide. And the beautiful thing about the conscience is it can reflect perfect wisdom from the super conscious portion of the mind and bring it into our conscious mind so that we can base our thoughts, our words, and our actions on that super conscious wisdom. And the consequence that follows always will enable each of us in our individual lives to fulfill the purpose of our life without pain.
So let me ask you a question here, or ask for some clarification, because some of our listeners might be saying, all right, what exactly is the conscience? And I'm just here trying to get through life, put food on the table, take care of my family. I don't have time for this conscious business.
Well, what's so interesting is the conscience is one of 4 functions of the mind. We always thought as children that it seemed to us that we had different voices in our mind. And as it turns out, it was true. There are 4 of them, but only one of the 4 can discriminate, determine, judge, and decide. So that means that every single choice that all of us have made in the past or will make in the future has been and always will be made by the conscience, even putting food on the table or taking care of the kids or driving to the supermarket. Every single choice that we have made has been made by the conscience. The other 3, the ego, the senses, the unconscious mind, they are only advisors. Now, because they only have a limited perspective and because they so often are in service to the reptilian brain, the ego, senses, and unconscious mind create a terrible disturbance in our mind. They're loud, they're pushy, they're insistent. They're often wrong, but they are never in doubt. So when there's so much noise, the only thing that the conscience can do is simply rubber stamp the loudest voice in our mind. And that's what brings us so much pain. We're being continually hijacked by the ego, senses, and unconscious mind in service to the reptilian brain that is dreadfully afraid of annihilation.
And I'm going to just ask you to pause there for 1 second, because when we are in a state of trauma, many of us, unless we're super trained in terms of our minds, we are in this fight or flight mode, which means we are not operating in the conscious mind.
Correct.
We're operating out of fear, anxiety, kill or be killed, fight or flight, all of those things that take us out of critical thinking and put us in response mode. Which
is the condition in our culture today, is it not?
It is. It is.
And it's
in many ways.
It's reinforced by the media all the time. Stay tuned while we have a break and come back, and we'll tell you about a disease that you probably never heard of, but that you already have.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's really a lot. And I think what I find so challenging about what you're sharing, and by the way, I agree. I'm drinking the Kool-Aid, and I mean that in a positive way, although that has a negative connotation. What I find hard to wrap my head around is the difficulty in following the advice on a constant basis. And this is where the training comes in, right? Where we practice and keep practicing, and we might fail, and we come back to the practice.
Well, there are no failures. Everything is a work in progress. And the highest principle that guides all of our experiments to determine whether the conscience is really leading us for our highest good, the highest principle is always non-injury, non-harming. So we don't start out with these major emotionally charged issues. We start out with simple no-brainers. It's 10 o'clock at night. I'm watching a little TV to relax. A coffee commercial comes on. The ego, senses, and unconscious mind are already lobbying in favor of having a cup of coffee at 10 o'clock at night. Maybe have a couple of spoonfuls of sugar, half and half, and a second slice of apple pie that we had for dinner. But the conscience might have a different perspective because it can reflect superconscious wisdom. And the conscience at 10 o'clock at night might say, hey, we all know that we have a very important business meeting tomorrow at the office. We need a good night's sleep. Caffeine is going to keep us up. Let's sacrifice our desire for a cup of coffee at 10 o'clock at night just to serve our superconscious wisdom and see how we feel.
This is a great example, and one that I think we can all relate to. Although coffee might not be your thing, we all have something that is that thing at 10 o'clock at night that we could be tempted by, that goes against better judgment. And so this is the practice, right? This then becomes the practice when the urge arises to use the conscious mind, to use critical thinking, to rationalize a decision. For the good. The greater good is the hope, actually. Not like, what the hell, I'm going to give into it,
Right. That's right. Well, we've been doing that for a long time, and that creates channels in the unconscious mind. It creates our software. And that's why we think the same things, we say the same things, and we do the same things every day, hoping and praying for different outcomes.
Do you think that these four voices, put the conscious mind aside, that the voices are always seeking pleasure, right? They're seeking the least line of resistance. They're seeking the absence of suffering and discomfort. And yet, being alive and breathing, being human, means that we will encounter these experiences, including but not limited to the pandemic.
Well, you see, I think it really starts with the ego, because the ego, it seems to me, is hardwired to the reptilian brain. And so as the agent for the reptilian brain, the ego insinuates itself into every relationship and sort of cuts it in half and says, over here in this portion, this is pleasant. I like it. I consider this good. Let's reprise it.
Yeah.
But over here, you see, this is unpleasant. I don't like this. I call this bad. I want to eliminate this. And so what happens is the ego constantly reinforces our likes and dislikes based on pleasant or unpleasant. And we already know that that which is appearing as pleasant is not always good for us. And that which is appearing as unpleasant isn't always bad for us. So if we blindly, without our superconscious wisdom reflected by the conscience, if we simply throw in with the limited perspectives of the ego, sometimes the ego will be right, no doubt, but an awful lot will be wrong. And that those wrong concepts are equated with pain.
We're going to take a break in a minute. But before we go to the break, I want to just get your opinion or your experience of the quarantine period, because for me, it was hard. Yes, it's hard to be disconnected and separated from our loved ones. But my experience of it was, for the first time in my life, I felt that I really wasn't separated from the world and everyone else. Like, this was such a global experience that it became a common denominator, which in its own inverse way was comforting.
Yes, I believe that was true. I experienced that, and that common denominator was that each of us, being in quarantine, things not being normal, we were forced to go within and rely on our own inner wisdom, as opposed to all these experts outside of us that are trying to convince us that this should be done, that should be done, drive this automobile, you'll be happy, eat this food, you'll be successful, whatever.
Yeah. Maybe it could be considered the Great Awakening for many of us.
I think so. It's certainly a great opportunity. I consider the COVID situation a eucatastrophe. The EU in front of catastrophe is a Greek prefix that means good. It's a good kind of catastrophe. Yes, there's plenty of pain. There's plenty of death. There's no question about that.
And needless. I think we also should add that there was needless death and suffering as well.
Because of ignorance, because of many ignorances of human minds that are hijacked continually by ego senses and unconscious mind, without the superconscious wisdom reflected by the conscience. Mm-hmm.
What a perfect place to take that break. We are going to jump off for a moment, and when we return, we'll continue the conversation with Leonard Perlmutter. He is the author of many books, but the one we're talking about today is Your Conscience, the Key to Unlock Limitless Wisdom and Creativity and Solve All of Life's Challenges. To learn more, please visit AmericanMeditation.org, on Twitter at AMI Meditation, on Facebook, American Meditation Institute, and on Instagram, American Meditation Institute. Here comes that pause. We'll be right back, and that is a promise. Before we pause, let's talk about how our homes are creative expressions of ourselves. Home should be a happy place that's a canvas for connection and memory making. My home is the hub of my family. Home is my haven, castle, sanctuary, recording studio, office, boardroom, creativity laboratory, and base camp for my peeps. Get your home holiday ready for cooler temps and cozy gatherings now. Get ready for Joybird's Black Friday and Cyber Monday sales. Joybird offers crisp, modern, customizable furnishings and accessories for every space. Joybird is furniture that fits your style in a wide variety of vibrant and durable designs. It's like visiting a virtual candy store for your home, with more than 18,000 customized options to help you express your one-of-a-kind style. Recently, I bought Joybird's Soto chair for the perfect spot next to the fireplace in my bedroom. I love snuggling by the fire with a great book. Don't know where to start? Joybird's design specialists are standing by to help make your vision a reality for free. Ordering online has never been easier or more fun. From design to customer care, Joybird has got you covered. Joybird furniture stands by its quality and craftsmanship. If it's not everything you'd hope for, send it back within 90 days. Each piece is made with incredible care using responsibly sourced materials that are free of harmful chemicals. Joybird is also committed to a more sustainable future by partnering with groups like One Tree Planted to help conserve and restore Earth's precious natural resources. Simply put, Joybird furniture is made with top-notch stain and scratch-resistant fabrics and comes with a limited lifetime warranty. Joybird furniture can handle anything your family throws at it, literally. Create a space that brings you joy with Joybird. Visit joybird.com/happiness and get 35% off your purchase. That's 35% off at joybird.com/happiness. Now here comes the pause. We'll be right back.
To learn more about cultivating sustainable well-being at home and the office, visit harvestinghappiness.com and explore Lisa's experiential on-site brain fitness workshops, corporate programming, and speaking engagement services.
Hang on just a second. Before we rejoin the conversation, let's talk about how to take the hassle out of healthcare. Prioritizing our health is an essential part of personal responsibility and is a part of human happiness. When you need a good doctor, you generally need one right away, not days, weeks, or months from now. And when you need to see an MD ASAP, we've got a solution. Just download the free ZocDoc app, the easiest way to find a great doctor and instantly book an appointment. With ZocDoc, you can resource and compare doctors, verified patient reviews, and even book an appointment. Never wait on hold for a receptionist or get lost in voicemail hell again. ZocDoc takes the pain out of finding and scheduling a doctor. Whether you need a primary care physician, dentist, dermatologist, eye doctor, or any other medical specialist, ZocDoc has got you covered. Recently, I found a dermatologist on ZocDoc who accepted my insurance and could see me right away. So head on over to ZocDoc.com/happiness and download the ZocDoc app for free. Join me and millions of other happy patients who use ZocDoc each month to find and book great doctors. ZocDoc helps us control our schedules and our healthcare at the same time. Now is the time to prioritize your health. Go to ZocDoc.com/happiness and download the ZocDoc app to sign up for free and book a top-rated doctor. Many are available as soon as today. That's ZocDoc.com/happiness. Now let's get back to it. This episode was recorded while on the road, and you know what that means. Imperfect sound, imperfect technology, but still that perfect, health-consciously prepared brain food. And we're back, exploring a better life practice, answering tough challenges through conscious solutions. Let's get back to the conversation with Leonard Perlmutter. Leonard, we talked about the inverted opportunity that resided within the pandemic experience. You and I shared a common experience during that period. But let's talk about how thought rules the mind and the two kinds of thoughts that there are.
Well, thoughts are our most powerful resource. When you look at the law of karma, which was later restated by Newton's third law of motion, thoughts lead to action. Action leads to consequences. Thought, action, consequence. That's the sequence. So if we're honest with ourselves, we can already determine what the consequence is that we want to experience. We want to experience health, happiness, security, loving, nurturing, creative relationships. So the question then is, how are we going to get to point B from point A? And what the law of karma says, those consequences come through actions, and actions begin with thoughts. So everything leads back to thoughts. And there are two basic forms of thoughts. In Sanskrit, the Indian language, they are known as praya and shreya. But let me demystify that for you. The prayas are some form of ego or sense gratification that conflicts with the superconscious wisdom reflected by the conscience. Some ego or sense gratification that is in conflict with our own inner wisdom. But the praya is pleasant, it's attractive, it's comfortable, it's familiar.
Seductive, I would even add.
Very seductive,
yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And there's no doubt that when we serve these prayas, whether it's a second jelly donut, a desire for a second jelly donut, or worrying. There's a little bit of a satisfaction and sometimes a passing pleasure, but it always returns to some form of physical, mental, emotional, or spiritual dis-ease or pain.
Hang on one second. Let me just jump in here about the worry and the purpose of worry, as the great distractor. Talk a little bit about that. When our mind gets caught up in the worry, we aren't actually devoting ourselves to the thought and action that brings positive consequence or outcome.
Well, first of all, if I'm worrying, where's my mind? It's not in the present moment dealing with what is.
Yes.
I'm off into the future. What if this should happen? What if that should happen? What if neither happens? All my creative energy is spilling into the future, which doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Or I could be directing my mind to the past, memories, some pleasant, some unpleasant. Rarely are we trained to be in the present moment, but only in the present moment can the conscience reflect superconscious wisdom from the superconscious portion of the mind, the same portion of the mind where Albert Einstein saw mathematical equations and where Paul McCartney today hears beautiful melodies. Doesn't mean that we're going to become songwriters or physicists. What it does mean is if we can sacrifice these prayas, these ego or sense gratifications, we can transform their energy into healing energy, willpower, and creativity. So the preya is one form of thought. The second form is called shreya. These thoughts, they're not so comfortable, they're not so familiar, they're not so attractive, but they will always, always, always lead us for our highest and greatest good. And so the key to successful living is to serve the wisdom of the conscience, which will tell us which are the shreyas to be served and which are the preyas to be sacrificed and transformed into a healing, creative energy.
So check in with me here for a moment. The renunciation of ego, negative thought, useless wasting of energy, how might we begin the practice of this renunciation?
It's all about experimentation. It's all about experimentation. We just finished dinner. It was very good. The question comes before the mind. Are we going to brush our teeth? Now, the ego might say, no, it's unpleasant. The senses might say, no, I'd rather have another dessert. The unconscious mind goes along with the ego or senses because the unconscious has these habit patterns already formed of not wanting to brush the teeth. But if we can parent the ego, senses, and unconscious mind and have them quiet down after they share their limited perspective and opinion, then the conscience in that quietude has the capacity to reflect superconscious wisdom from the superconscious portion of the mind. And the conscience might say something like, well, we all know that this life that we're living is more like a sprint rather than a marathon. And for a marathon, we need healthy teeth. We need healthy, strong gums. We need a healthy, strong immune system. And if we can just take a 2-minute time out and brush our teeth, that will provide us strong and healthy teeth, gums, and an immune system. And then it's up to me as the parent of my mind to encourage the ego, senses, and unconscious mind simply for an experiment to see whether they can experience something pleasurable by brushing the teeth. My experience is all three have experienced something pleasurable by brushing the teeth.
Oh, yes. I'm closing my eyes. I happen to like to brush my teeth, but I think of all the voices that do get satisfied by the process of brushing one's teeth. Yes. And any other mindful process, right? That what you're suggesting is taking something that could be perceived as unpleasurable or annoying and turning it into a pleasurable experience or an observing experience. And that's how we begin to train the mind.
Yes. So if if I can get buy-in from the ego, senses, and unconscious mind to listen to the conscience in this relatively easy experiment, and they have a pleasurable experience, they are going to trust me and they are going to trust the conscience more today than they did yesterday. And they are no longer going to fear every change as some form of a death. Rather, they'll look at change as growth.
Yeah. Although seeing the death or observing or experiencing the death of one aspect of self that is no longer of value to us is not a bad thing, to be able to sort of release it and put it to rest.
That's right.
I don't need to do that anymore because it's not good for me.
That's right. I've done that. It doesn't work all the time, and it can be very painful.
But what I also hear is you not poo-pooing pain. Like, we need to be realistic in that if we're alive, if we're breathing, we will experience pain, loss, disappointment, and stress. Sometimes not good stress either. Sometimes, eustress is the good stress. You mentioned the EU, but distress, that is part of our experience. But we can minimize it. What I hear you saying is through this very simple process that you're suggesting.
I agree. We can minimize it, but also we can learn from the pain, because pain is a wonderful opportunity to recognize that there's some inner conflict. There's a conflict between my outer actions and my inner wisdom. That's why I have the pain. And so when I'm aware of pain, especially if I can simply listen to the low decibel levels, the whispers of pain, I have an opportunity to make a mid-course correction. It's a little bit like when we drive the automobile to an appointment at a location that I've never been to. So I put the information into my GPS system. And if I perchance make the wrong turn, what does the GPS say to me? Recalculating.
Yep. Rerouting, recalculating.
Right.
And to get to the destination via a course corrected route.
That's right. And so that's what we're looking for. We want to be happy. We want to be healthy. We want to be secure, loving, creative, nurturing relationships. And so if we can use and go to school on the pain that we experience, we can make a mid-course correction. And that will be an experiment. Doesn't have to be forever. We'll see. Does that make me feel better physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually? My experience is yes, if I'm using my conscience as my guide.
Well said. I wanted to touch upon one more point here before we're out of time, and that is, what does one-pointed attention mean? You write about this in your latest book, Your Conscience.
Well, we all experience one-pointed attention every time we love something. I love this book. I love that movie. I love that experience. I love that woman. I love that man. I love that child. And what happens in the mind during those experiences that motivates us to say that we love that book or that movie or whatever? What happens is when we are experiencing the reading of that book or the watching of that particular movie, the energy of my mind is automatically focused on only one object.
Yeah.
I'm still there, you see, but I'm no longer aware of me. I am so totally engrossed in what is appearing. And so that is the key to success, because if I can train my mind at will, I don't need a book. I don't need the movie. I don't need this individual per se to focus my mind to that one point. And in that one point, automatically is created a space between stimulus and response. And what is in the space between stimulus and response? My freedom to discriminate between passing pleasure and perennial joy.
Well, and that builds an extremely strong case for presence,
That's right.
Really. I mean, because that is what I'm hearing, that when we are fully present, and I know this word has been, overused, but the sense of presence is the experience of full presence is 99.9% of the time. That experience is a good one.
Correct.
In that full presence, in that occupation of life, in that moment. And that's what I'm hearing you say, or paraphrasing you.
Well, that's right. And so part of our job as human beings is to watch the mind. And when it unnecessarily, without purpose, rushes off into the future or into the past to rummage around like chewing gum, we can draw it back at will, at the object that is necessary, at the relationship that is in front of me, that is calling for my attention and an action that will bring a consequence.
Leonard Perlmutter, thank you for joining me today. Thanks for sharing your latest book, Your Conscience, the key to unlock limitless wisdom and creativity and solve all of life's challenges. And I really accentuate that because through the process that you've described today, I understand how we could get there, how through practice we could get there. To learn more, please visit AmericanMeditation.org, on Twitter at AMI Meditation, on Facebook, American Meditation Institute, and on Instagram, American Meditation Institute. As always, Leonard, thanks for joining me today.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you. Thank you very much.
We'll take that break and we'll be right back. That's a promise.
Did you know that happiness is actually good for your health? Happy people live longer, are more productive, and make better partners, parents, and professionals. Connect with us on Facebook at Harvesting Happiness and follow Lisa on Twitter at Lisa Kamen for a daily dose of inspiration.
Welcome back. Let's continue that conversation about a better life practice, answering tough challenges through conscious solutions. My next guest is Dr. Eric Maisel. Eric Maisel, PhD, is the author of more than 50 books, including the latest I just mentioned, The Power of Daily Practice. He has been quoted or featured in a variety of publications, including Martha Stewart Living, Redbook, Glamour, Men's Health, The San Francisco Chronicle, and Self. He lives in the Bay Area of San Francisco, California, and his newest book, to me, is a little bit unique. It's entitled Lighting the Way, How Kirism Answers Life's Toughest Questions. Eric, welcome back to this show. Please introduce us to Kirism as a philosophy.
Hi, Lisa. It's great to be back with you.
Oh, wonderful.
I've probably been brewing or hatching this philosophy for literally 70 years, I think. When I was growing up in Brooklyn, I grew up in one of those religious neighborhoods. They were all religious neighborhoods, half Jewish and half Catholic. And right from the beginning, as a very young child, I believed that religion was a betrayal of our common humanity. The idea that some group knew something that I knew they didn't know about the universe annoyed me, even as a young person. And I've been thinking about these things for a very long time. And I grew up in the age of existentialism, which spoke to me. That philosophy spoke to me. And existentialism is one of the few new philosophies that had come along in a very long time, really had a new feeling to it, talked about personal responsibility, which I believed in, and then it stopped short of speaking about the psychological and practical difficulties of taking personal responsibility in life. It was fine as a philosophy, but it wasn't very useful as a practical entity. So I also had that on my mind for a very long time. I've been coaching creative and performing artists for the last 30 plus years. And so in working with them, I got to understand lots of psychological issues around depression and anxiety and addiction and getting your work done and not getting your work done and dealing with the marketplace, etc. So to make this long story short, Kirism has been brewing for a long time. And if I had to define it very simply, it's an updated psychological version of existentialism. It speaks to taking personal responsibility, but it also describes and discusses how difficult it is to take personal responsibility, all the ways in which we want to censor ourselves and not get our work done. So I think it's a practical, updated existentialism.
And what are the origins of its name, Kirism? It's not a cocktail. It's not a Kir Royale.
It's not, although that's not a bad idea, but no, you can imagine what kind of an odd, almost absurd task it is to try to invent a name for a philosophy. So I've been thinking about it for a long time and landed on the part of speech kir, K-I-R, as appearing in many languages and standing in those many, mostly Central European and Eastern European languages for illumination and spark and light. So I just liked those associations. And it also wasn't so hard to say. I thought Kirism would be relatively easy to say. So between those illumination and light associations and the ease of saying it, that's how I landed on that name.
I like it. And when we talk about more Kirist ideas and the notion of self-responsibility, does that also encompass self-mastery? Because in my mind, in order to be responsible for self, you have to also master the demons or the choir of the mind.
Absolutely. There are many different ways to say that. One way is that we need to be the hero of our own story, that we do need personal heroism. Another way to say it is that each of us could do with a personality upgrade. That's another way of saying self-mastery. I like the personality upgrade idea. I have a vision of personality as it being comprised of three parts: original personality, how we come into the world, and then formed personality, the way we stiffen over time, and then available personality, our remaining freedom to be the person we would like to be. And so in my vision of personality, we use our available personality to sort of unstiffen our stiff personality. And that's the same as a personality upgrade, or as you say, self-mastery. If we didn't have any remaining freedom, we would just be stuck in that formed personality place. And I kind of envision that available personality as an amount that changes over time. We have more of it or less of it, depending on where we are in life. If we're currently addicted and running around town looking for a heroin fix, we don't have that much available personality. We're really stuck in our formed personality. The second we enter recovery, we have more available personality available. So in that model, that's just another way of thinking about the thing you just said, self-mastery, which is a central tenet of Kirism, that we need to take that personal responsibility.
And when you speak of, running around town looking for heroin, we can put it into other terms too. If we're running around town trying to numb with whatever the substance or behavior of choice is, because all of us do it on one level or another. I mean, I think it's human nature, right? We all want pleasure. We want to run from pain or have the absence of pain in our lives. But when we find ourselves, whether it's shopping or being on our handheld devices or seeking stronger pharmaceuticals, we are in that sort of lower self, right? We're not at our most self-actualized place.
Absolutely. So Kirism starts from the following place. There are a couple of big points, a couple of headlines. One is, from my point of view, there is no purpose to life. There are rather our life purpose choices. There are decisions about what we consider to be important. And most people actually have never identified them. They haven't, to use simple language, made a list of what's important to them. If you make that list, and if you then live that list, then you're less likely to turn to the meaning substitutes that you mentioned before. If you start your day, or if you have your day organized around what's important to you, rather than just your eternal to-do list, then you're less likely to fall into those traps. So that's A. B, people for thousands of years have been caught by a certain metaphor, and that is the meaning of life and seeking the meaning of life. In Kirism, that's another idea that we do not believe in, that there is a meaning of life to seek, but rather we make our own meaning, or rather, to be precise about it, we try to coax meaning into existence. That meaning is a certain kind of psychological experience that comes and goes, which is why we shouldn't worry if we aren't feeling that life is meaningful at any split second, because as any other experience, it simply comes and goes. But if you begin to get the idea that meaning is something to coax into existence, then that helps you understand what your daily chores are. Your daily chores or responsibilities are to live your life purposes and to try to coax meaning into existence on that day.
This is a big concept for many, I think, because we are always looking like for external sources to validate, our worth. And what I'm hearing you say is that it's up to us to create that worth, to create that value, that there's nothing on the outside that can really do that on a sustainable level.
There's nothing on the outside that can do that on a sustainable basis.
Yeah. I mean, we can get little spikes, right? We get little surges from validation from others or.
Absolutely. And we can love a quote from somebody, or we can love somebody's idea. There are all sorts of things out there that may impress us or influence us, but then we have to decide. We have to decide what's important to us, which is a shifting thing. Folks would like that if they make that decision, they'd like that decision to last for all time. If I say this is important, shouldn't that be important for all time? No, because things change. To give you a simple example, let's say that we decide that our health is very important to us, makes sense. But then our child comes to us and tells us that she has a disease and needs a kidney. Well, suddenly her life is more important than our health. We're going to have an operation that threatens our health, but for the sake of our child. So the ordering of our life purposes changed there. On Monday, our health may have been number 2, and on Tuesday, it may be number 7.
Yeah.
That's the way life really is. What's important to us shifts. One day we may be for a war that our nation is fighting. The next day we may learn more about that war and be against it. And suddenly we're an activist against the war, whereas the day before we were an activist for the war. This is exactly how life goes. So we have to maintain really a flexibility that most people are not accustomed to, the flexibility of changing their opinions, changing their whole belief system as their beliefs change.
Without ascribing the name hypocrite to oneself, because you believe something on one day and then life shows us or unfolds other facts that then allow us to take that information and change our opinion.
Not just not hypocrite, but also not foolish. I think that that's one of the challenges of actually going with change, is that we feel foolish that we were X before and Y now. How is it that we didn't know better then? How is it that we didn't know that our father was a bully? Did we not see it? Or that he was drinking hard? Did we not see that? I think we feel stupid. And so for me, the word that takes care of this feeling is the word process, that life is a process. It really is. And so rather than feeling foolish, the better attitude is to feel like we now are exactly where we need to be in our understanding. And we probably don't know enough. And tomorrow we still won't know enough, and we will never know enough. All we can do is base our decisions on what we know at this moment. And another Kirist idea, sort of the ethical piece to Kirism, is a very simple idea: do the next right thing. That's the whole Kirist ethical philosophy in a nutshell, do the next right thing. Well, you can only do the next right thing based on where exactly you are at this split second. What you know right now allows you to try to do the right thing.
But to do the right thing, you have to know what that right thing is and to trust yourself enough to know that what you're doing is the right thing in that moment.
Well, you have to hazard a guess. I wouldn't use the language that you need to know what the next right thing is. I think all you can do is hazard a guess. And I think you can hazard that guess based on history. If something felt meaningful in the past, let's say crossing the street holding your child's hand always feels meaningful.
Always.
Well, then you know that there's a good shot that crossing the street holding your child's hand today will feel meaningful.
Yeah.
That's the way we ought to think about meaning, that there are meaning investments to make, like taking our child's hand and crossing the street, and meaning opportunities to seize, things that might feel meaningful, but these are just guesses. We may have dreamed for 20 years that living in a studio in Paris is going to feel meaningful. And then we go there and it's a rainy January and we can't speak the language and we're really quite upset. Well, it was a good guess. I mean, we had reasons for believing, and we shouldn't feel foolish or stupid or ridiculous or that we failed or anything. We seized an opportunity and it wasn't there quite.
Yeah.
And then we have to quickly understand that and move on to our next life purpose and our next meaning opportunity.
Let's take a break. We are going to pause for a moment and then come back and talk further with Eric Maisel about Lighting the Way, how Kirism answers life's toughest questions. We're talking about contemporary philosophy for complicated times. To learn more, please visit www.ericmaisel.com. Also, thefutureofmentalhealth.com, on Twitter at Eric Maisel, and on Facebook, Eric Maisel. Here comes the break. We'll be right back, and that is a promise.
Who says money can't buy happiness? Whether you are a skeptic or seeker, check out Lisa's new book. Are we happy yet? 8 Keys to Unlocking a Joyful Life. A boot camp manual for greater emotional fitness is available at Barnes & Noble, Amazon, IndieBound, and HarvestingHappiness.com. Here's a truth bomb. Emotions are contagious, and happiness is a universally desired state. But we tend to forget that we all have the freedom to be happy or the liberty to be miserable each day, regardless of external circumstances. Explore the journey of human happiness, how to find it and keep it, with Lisa's documentary film, H Factor. Where is your heart? Visit HarvestingHappiness.com to learn more.
We're back. Let's rejoin the conversation with Dr. Eric Maisel. We're talking about a better life practice, answering tough challenges through conscious solutions. My guest today is Eric Maisel, PhD. He is the author of more than 50 books. We recently spoke about one of his latest, The Power of Daily Practice, but he is also has written a very interesting book entitled Lighting the Way, How Kirism Answers Life's Toughest Questions. And Kirism is the byproduct of decades of Eric's research and interest about creating a more simplified approach to life, which I love, Eric.
And simple doesn't mean easy, of course.
Of course.
Of course. And so one of the simple Kirist ideas is the idea of daily practice, without saying what that practice ought to be. That's for you to decide. But the idea of daily practice per se is an important idea. And I know this because in working with creative performing artists for really 30 plus years, the second they stop working on their novel for 2 or 3 days, they lose weeks, months, and years. That's what happens. Because the things that we mean to do that are important are often hard things, like writing our novel or being an activist or whatever it is, the hard thing. If we stop doing it for even a little time, and by a little time I mean 3 consecutive days, we're likely to lose lots of time and maybe even never come back to it. That's the experience of so many of my clients, that they stopped working on their novel and now it's 5 years later. They stopped working on their memoir, they stopped painting, they stopped composing, and now it's 5 years later. It's not 2 weeks later, it's 5 years later. That's why I thought it was so important to press the idea of daily practice, and I'm trying to underline daily without shouting here, because daily really means every day. Now, one Kirist daily practice is to, let me step back. Let's say that you've done the thing that we talked about in the last segment, which is identify your life purposes. Made a list, so to speak, of the things that are important to you. Well, one Kirist practice is to have a check-in every morning. It could take just half a minute, where you're with that list and you make decisions about which of your life purposes you can get to on that day. Maybe it's getting to your novel, or maybe it's having that hard conversation with your son about his drinking, or maybe it's relationship building, or maybe it's a personality upgrade, or whatever it is. You get to make decisions first thing each day as to which of your daily practices you're going to get to. And then in my language, you would negotiate your day. You would pencil in a certain number of daily practices. This may sound, boring, or how this is going to be too regular, too routine, too something. But it's really the way to live the life you've always intended living. It's not boring at all to actually write your novel and then actually have a relationship and then actually have the hard conversations you need to have. That's exactly the way to live your life. And then the other parts of the day, which aren't your daily practices, which are maybe just chores or relaxation or whatever, the task there, or the challenge there, is to hold them in what I call meaning neutral. That is, to not pester yourself about what it feels like to be caught in the commute. You're just stuck. You're just stuck. So parts of the day are going to feel meaningful, the parts that are your daily practices. Parts of the day are likely not going to feel very meaningful. And it takes an adult or mature understanding to understand that that's exactly how life goes. Parts of each day will feel meaningful and many parts will not.
I want to ask you something about that, because many who are listening may not live a technicolor creative life. You know, they may be people who don't pursue the creative arts, but I believe there is an application of this philosophy to, I'm doing the air quote, the ordinary life, which can be the extraordinary life.
Sure. The main thing is that you identify what's important to you. If you can't, I think you understand how a person is stuck if he or she can't identify what's important. You kind of have to stop everything at that point, because you're going to be, to use shrink language, depressed, I would say despairing. If nothing is feeling important to you, or if you've not identified anything as important, or if you haven't decided what's important, you're going to be in despair. That's the way human beings operate. If nothing's important, you're in despair. So step one is to identify some things that are important. But they don't have to be doing things like writing a novel. They can be being things, like maybe what's important to you is being calmer or being more passionate, taking certain kinds of risks. There are all kinds of things that might be important to you that could be your daily practices that any human being might engage with just because he or she believes that those are the important things. And in the daily practice book, the Power of Daily Practice, I identify, I think, maybe 20 kinds of daily practice. Of course, it's an infinite number, but I identify 20 kinds of daily practices. It might be career building. It might be relationship building. It might be mindfulness. It might be the personality upgrade bit that we chatted about before. Anybody, whether they're a self-identified creative and performing artist or not, can find things to organize a daily practice around.
And I think during this period of time when there is a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of political strife, there are a lot of unknowns, people are feeling worry and despair about what's going on around them. I believe this offers a tether back to ourselves to take charge of whether it's self-mastery or self-responsibility, and empower us to feel like there are things that we actually can change.
It's a golden opportunity. It is.
Yes.
And what I'm noticing is that my peeps, my creative and performing artist clients and the people who follow me are having an extra hard time now, not just because if you're a performer, you can't be performing, or not just for all of those reasons, but because they're extra disappointed in themselves. By having this extra time, they're feeling that they ought to be getting more done. They should be doing more work on their novel or more painting, and they're doing less than ever because their mind is all caught up in current events and because they're distraught and anxious. So a lot of folks are feeling worse than ever by virtue of having this extra time that they're not using. So I think that's another reason to make use of this simple but not easy idea of daily practice. If you show up to your work without attaching to outcomes, it doesn't matter if you write 3 words or 1,000 words or no words, but it's the activity of showing up that ultimately makes us proud. It's one of the ideas of Kirism is that we're not in life to be happy. Happy is a lucky byproduct of living. We're in life to make ourselves proud by our efforts.
Yeah, how we show up. How are we going to show up for life?
That's right. And so that's one of the things that's most needed right at this moment. We're not showing up by running around town, because this is not a running around town moment. We're showing up by doing things right at home that matter, that we can do in our space. With
care, with attention, with, I think, purpose and principle, even if it's the smallest thing, you know. I can think of, my forays into bread baking and really just trying to practice, I'm not a great bread baker, but I like doing it. And that was one way I could force myself through the practice to be more present, less judgmental about what was happening on the outside, because I'm, nurturing the inside.
And let's say you are like many of my creative performing artist clients who prefer solitude to relating. I mean, they would all pay lip service to how much they enjoy relating, but for a lot of them, we'd really rather be in the studio painting than dealing with other human beings. Well, this may be an opportunity to do some relationship building, to reach out to someone that you would like to be chatting with, that you have a sister, a brother, an uncle, someone. This is opportune time for introducing practices like that into your life.
And these are such beautiful, simplistic practices. Maybe not easy, right? Because if you haven't spoken to that sister or that brother or that relative in a long period of time, the initiation may be a little awkward. But
exactly right. And let me piggyback on that one idea. In talking about meaning as a psychological experience, what we have to remember is if we're doing our real work, doing our life purpose work, we may not be getting the experience of meaning from it. This is a big learning. Let's say we're working on our novel. Well, on many days, it might just be sloggy work, and we're not experiencing the work as meaningful. That can lead us to believe that we're not talented, that we shouldn't be doing this, that we're failing. All that's happening is that we're in the middle of process, and we're not getting the experience of meaning from that process. That has to be okay. In the days before D-Day, we don't care if Eisenhower is feeling D-Day meaningful or not. We just want him to get it right. We want him to do the work.
Yeah.
And I think if we live life sort of like that we have things like important invasions in our future, then we understand that it's the showing up and not the experience that we're having as we show up that matters.
I like that. I mean, it is in the process of doing the work. And that may not be glamorous. It may not be easy. It may not be comfortable. But there is something noble in that showing up. Like, here I am.
Although noble is not a word I would use much, I completely agree that it's noble. I think more in terms of personal pride, but I think, and heroism, but I think personal nobility is another way to say the same thing. We need that because most people know that they're kind of disappointing themselves, that they're not leading their most noble life. And they can identify reasons, maybe authoritarian parents and this kind of harm and that kind of trauma. We can identify the reasons why we're not our biggest self or most perfected self. But that doesn't mean we're not disappointing ourselves by how we're operating. So this is an opportunity to do more and to do better.
The book we've been speaking of today is Eric Maisel's newest, Lighting the Way, How Kirism Answers Life's Toughest Questions. Simple, everyday philosophy for complicated times. We're living in definitely challenging moments. And Eric, before we go, just mention the 3 personality types and just a description of each of those types for us.
In my vision of how personality is organized, there's what I call original personality, the way we come into the world. Everybody who's had, kittens or puppies or kids knows that every creature comes into the world already itself. Psychology, psychiatry takes none of that into account, which is a big flaw in psychology and psychiatry. But so there's original personality. Then there's what I call formed personality, and that's the way we stiffen or accrete over time. We become our repetitious self. And then there's what I call available personality, our remaining freedom to be the person we would like to be. And in my language, we accomplish a personality upgrade by using our available freedom to reduce the stiffness of our formed personality.
To learn more about Eric's work, please visit ericmaisel.com, on Twitter at Eric Maisel, and on Facebook, Eric.Maisel. The book, once again, we've been speaking of today is Lighting the Way, How Kirism Answers Life's Toughest Questions. As always, I love hanging out with you and look forward to your next project. To know more.
Thanks, Lisa. It's been great with you today.
Thanks for joining us on Harvesting Happiness today. This is Lisa Cypers Kamen and my guests, Leonard Perlmutter and Dr. Eric Maisel, wishing you kind thoughts, kinder words, and the kindest of actions. Until next time, remember, happiness is an inside job. Happiness is your inside job. Please go out and rock your day and remember to be kind to one another.
Keep harvesting your own happiness anytime and anywhere from the comfort of wherever you are. Subscribe, listen, and share hundreds of downloadable episodes via our free app or from our libraries at toginet.com, iTunes, Google Play, and other fine podcast platforms. To learn more about Lisa's global consulting services, please visit harvestinghappiness.com. Spread more joy by liking us on Facebook at Harvesting Happiness and following Lisa on Twitter at Lisa Kamen. Harvesting Happiness is produced in collaboration with TogiNet Radio, KBUU Radio Malibu.net, and is available on PRX, the Public Radio Exchange.